If you're consuming a medicine, be it Ayurvedic, be it allopathic, inherently there's no difference. You are digesting something in order for it to give you a healthcare outcome. If that's the case, then why would we have a different level of safety or manufacturing standards for allopathy versus Ayurvedic? The large opportunity which I saw was that how do we bring Ayurveda into the 21st century? Ayurveda is based on generational knowledge, and actually bringing it into the 21st century, a lot of traditional people say, oh, in some ways you're going against Ayurveda. But in reality, that's the only way to take Ayurveda forward.
Today I'm joined by Ameve Sharma, founder of Kapiva, a science-backed and measurable Ayurveda brand built for mainstream healthcare and for the modern consumer. Vertex Ventures Southeast Asia and India first invested in Kapiva's Series B and backed the company again at its Series D last year. Now let's talk to Ameve. My grandfather was an Ayurveda doctor, Vaidya, and I grew up around an Ayurveda factory. I know that you also have a similar background. Would love to know why you started Kapiva.
Ayurveda is based a lot on generational knowledge, which in many ways is very, very important, right? I think where we've kind of got behind, right, is updating that for a modern audience and world, right? What does that mean? It means that adding a layer of proof above some of the generational knowledge that we have, and then bringing everything from the product itself. But if you talked about manufacturing, even something like manufacturing into the modern age, right? The way I look at it is that if you're consuming a medicine, right, be it Ayurvedic, be it allopathic, inherently there's no difference, right? You're saying that I'm ingesting something in my mouth or I'm digesting something in order for it to give me a healthcare outcome. If that's the case, then why would we have a different level of safety or manufacturing standards for allopathic versus Ayurvedic, right? So the large opportunity, right, which I saw was that how do we bring Ayurveda into the 21st century, right? And actually bringing it into the 21st century, a lot of traditional people say, oh, in some ways you're going against Ayurveda, right? But in reality, that's the only way to take Ayurveda forward, right? The only way where Ayurveda has a significant future, especially in healthcare, is if it's embraced by the healthcare community, right? And the only way to do that is to make sure that everything from your clinical validation to your safety standards to your manufacturing standards are up to the mark of healthcare as a whole.
How is Ayurveda's approach to healthcare different from modern medicine? And like you mentioned, traditional players say that this is going against the ethos of Ayurveda, right?
Sure. So, actually it's very interesting. I think the reality is somewhere in the middle, right? So Ayurveda traditionally has a very holistic approach, right? And what does holistic approach mean? It means that through a combination of lifestyle, food, as well as medicine, right, you're able to kind of move your healthcare outcomes in the right direction. However, with science coming up, with new learnings coming up, right, a lot of these things become proven. So, for example, the idea of fasting was very, very famous in Ayurveda. Now, somebody won the Nobel Prize for showing how fasting actually leads to certain health outcomes, etc., right? So, a few things that Ayurveda has talked about has been validated, right? A few things in nutrition in particular still require a lot of work, not only within Ayurveda, but globally. But let's focus on the medicine part, right? What is Ayurvedic medicine, right? These are things from nature, right? Most often some kind of food, right? So be it a flower, be it a root, be it a leaf for a plant, right? That has a certain active ingredient, and that active ingredient has an impact on a certain pathway in your body, which leads to a health outcome, right? So a very common one which people would know is that something like a turmeric has an active ingredient called curcumin. And now there's a very clear pathway established that curcumin impacts inflammation in the body by reducing it, right? Same with like a vithanol in ashwagandha, reduces cortisol, right? So there are certain actives and those actives have been tagged to certain pathways, right? If I even look at the first 100 allopathic medicines that were built, right? What is aspirin, right? Aspirin, people used to boil the bark of the willow tree and drink it as a pain reliever. So within that, they identified the active, and a synthesized version of that is aspirin, right? A lot of this was figured out through trial and error, right? So if I consume this plant or this root, it will have this impact on your body. Today, we can actually identify what is it within that plant, what is it within that root that's actually impacting you. And through a process, we can actually standardize those active ingredients. Once you standardize it and you understand the pathway, then you can show a predictable outcome to a customer, right? So you can say that, okay, within X plant, there's Y active, and I can standardize a process where every dosage you take, the active ingredient will be standardized. And so the impact on your body is much more predictable, right? So end of the day, it's taking the same principles and learnings, right? Those 5,000, if I was to start this today, hypothetically, for me to go and test millions and millions and millions of plants and herbs is a multi-trillion-dollar investment, right? The beauty is that I have thousands of years of research which is done through trial and error. So while using the base of Ayurvedic knowledge that already exists, building on that base through modern science can allow me to actually give much better quality outcomes and outcomes which are much more predictable, right?
Figuring out the active ingredients and also the consistency in the quantity, right?
Correct.
Which is often missing
Correct.
in the traditional medicines. But holistic approach still is important, right? Like,
Sure.
so growing up, I had a sinus issue for a long time, and then I had an Ayurveda treatment. But when you're taking whatever medicine, you also have to follow this diet very strict.
Sure.
It's called Patyam, at least in Kerala. But then since then, I've not had sinus issue. I don't know what happened, but yeah. So you mentioned about when you're bringing this to 21st century, the worry is that you lose out on this holistic approach. Is that still possible to do?
Sure. So the approach that we've taken, right, is that, so there's part A, part B. First of all, we're still trying to ensure that the holistic approach stays together, because that's why we have the entire health tech piece that we're building, right? Where almost all of our consumers, especially for slightly more serious problems like diabetes, etc., end up taking a doctor consultation, right? And that becomes the Ayurvedic doctor's kind of role to ensure that the food and lifestyle bit is added to the product bit, right? Having said that, we also try to ensure that in the product itself, as we standardize more and we make it more predictable, while the lifestyle changes are very, very good to have, the product itself also has a discernible impact on its own, right? So today, the standard that we are putting on for products, right, is where we are doing double-blind placebo RCT trials at large scale to ensure that the product itself is also moving the needle significantly. The food and lifestyle changes are things that kind of impact further on top of that.
Okay. So this is the health tech ecosystem bit that you talk about?
Correct.
So what does that actually mean? So there are these products that you sell, and beyond that?
So it has two aspects of it, right? One is pre-purchase and one is post-purchase, right? So pre-purchase would be more around identifying the problem itself, right? A lot of times we look at a symptom as the problem, whereas the problem could actually be something more core, right? So we do consultation primarily. And then we also allow people to share more information about the kind of issues they have so they can find the right product for them, right? Post-purchase is that you come in and saying that, okay, I have a problem, right? I have cholesterol, I have diabetes, right? Or, I'm going to the gym and I'm not seeing the results, right? So what's wrong? So in that case, what we do is that while you purchase, we collect information that you are willing to share. And based on that, as well as a doctor consultation, first we give you a personalized kind of food regimen, as well as a potentially additional single ingredient herbs or something to maximize the outcome of your treatment. Parallelly, we'll also take you on a content journey, right? So what will happen is that we know there are certain areas or points in which either at a food level or adherence level, people fall off and the outcome actually becomes less effective. So then we will actually take you on a journey along with the organization, be it through WhatsApp, be it through an app, be it through even something as email, to ensure that there's a higher possible chance of you hitting the health outcome, right? What we've seen is that there is almost a 30-40% improvement in outcome if people go through this journey, right? And that's why now the focus is to actually build this journey in actually an AI-based format through our app itself, where that becomes a part of the treatment itself.
Yeah.
So the treatment then becomes the product plus the journey,
Yeah.
not the product itself.
Nice. So How come there are all these large incumbent players within Ayurveda, right, for a long period of time?
Sure.
Why haven't these guys focused a lot on bringing Ayurveda, like you said, to modern?
Sure. If you look at China versus India, right? Uh, in India, I believe a lot of the traditional players actually started to focus on things like personal care, food, right? That became the core of the business, which, if you ask me, was probably the right decision at the time, right? But inadvertently, what happened was that a lot of focus on the healthcare part of Ayurveda didn't end up being invested in, right? Whereas if you look at China, a lot of the guys, traditional guys, ended up doubling down into R&D, into healthcare, right? So I think it was just a bunch of different things that happened, right, that led to this outcome. I don't think anybody was like, oh no, I don't want to invest into healthcare. I think the opportunity at that time was very clearly in the personal care food space.
So you've taken the opposite approach, investing a lot in R&D and clinical trials and things like. So what is that process like?
It really depends on the product, but just to give you some context on what an average sort of cycle looks like. So of course, our internal set of doctors will obviously play a large role as well, and we are actually sitting right now in the R&D center, right, where we have both internal and external, over 40, 50 doctors that work with us on a regular basis, right? But the process outside of our internal expertise, would be we've tied up with a AI-based platform that has actually tagged every single clinical trial that's already been done on Ayurvedic herbs, right? So rather than starting from zero, the idea is that at least let's start from the body of data that already exists. So that's the first step, actually seeing that which pathways have already been tagged, which herbs have already have some clinical validation, right? And good quality clinical validation, right? Post that, we'll come up with a list of maybe 5, 6, 7 formulations, right, where we feel that the impact would be highest. And that's where the cellular level testing starts, right? So we look at on a cellular level through in vitro, in vivo, that how is that formulation actually impacting the outcome on a cellular level and it's working or not, right? Post that, we'll be looking at animal testing, we'll be looking at single arm human testing. And then for our hero products, right, which eventually start to scale, we look at double blind placebo RCT. Right. So today, which would be more closer to a phase 3 trial for a allopathic company, right? So we have done a lot of phase 3 level trials already. Next stage now, we're also looking at phase 4, right? So phase 4 would be when you're looking at thousands and thousands of people in the clinical trial. Phase 3 and phase 4 is something we're ramping up for our top 5, 6 products currently.
Research is expensive, no? So as a startup, to make a call like that, it's a hard thing, right? Like, so what was your strategy on how to go about doing this?
Sure. So it was a multi-pronged strategy, right? I think, of course, the strategic thought started from the core belief, right? That if you really want your product and or Ayurveda to become mainstream, right? Just to give you an example, in India, the healthcare part of Ayurveda would be less than 0.5% of healthcare spends, right? In China, that number would be 15%, right? And now no matter what I do, marketing, product, unless you are embraced by the healthcare community, right, you're never going to get to 15%. Only way to really accomplish that is by investing into R&D, investing into clinical trial and having the same burden of proof on Ayurveda as any other product out there, right? Now, having said that, we are a funded business, right? So it took some time for us to even be able to socialize this idea, with our investors. But I think what really helped as well is that we got an investor in about 3-4 years ago who actually is a proper healthcare investor, right? And has funded research in everything from biotech to, hospitals. So I think building the right ecosystem internally, getting the right people in terms of team who can convince people externally. And it's not only a belief anymore, then there's a full game plan with clear data points. And then finally, of course, the core belief of the organization is that growth or even TAM is directly correlated to clinical validation, right? You asked me a question earlier, right? That why did a lot of people maybe not invest into clinical trial, right? I think one major difference between an India and a China was also that in China, there was a lot of skepticism around traditional medicine, right? Particularly from the Communist Party, right? So that also led to a lot of pressure to do those clinical validations, right? In India, it was exactly the opposite. There was a lot of belief in Ayurveda, right? So that pressure was also not there from a consumer point of view. Even today, we see that the clinical validation is more relevant for the healthcare community, potentially, than necessarily for the customer, right? So that is where it becomes a bit of a complicated decision to take, but one we very strongly believe in.
So the purpose of all this research that you end up with very high quality products that can deliver very predictable health outcomes, right? So at least my thinking is that it's a function of both safety. You do not want anything
Absolutely.
harmful, and then it's also like you mentioned, there is that what amount leads to what kind of outcome, and knowing that in terms of active ingredients. Is there anything else to this?
No, so like I said, there's three things, right? I think defining efficacy, like you said. So if a new age customer is not going to say, oh, I'll take it for 2 months and see what happens, right? We need to be clear that 1 week, what is the benefit? 1 month, what's the benefit? 2 months, what's the benefit? Like you said. I think safety, second thing. I think third thing, which I mentioned earlier, was the fact that for the healthcare community to embrace it, they also need proof, right? So today, if a customer might believe X, Y, Z, but if the doctor who they're working with, right, is unsure about it, that becomes a huge barrier for Ayurveda to grow, right? So I think another big benefit of R&D is that the larger healthcare community kind of starts accepting Ayurveda more and more.
Yeah. Talking of safety, right? The one thing a lot of people, especially in modern medicine or allopathy, have been trashing Ayurveda for is a lot of heavy metals inside a lot of these medicines, right? Which damages liver and other stuff. So how do you ensure that this doesn't happen? Even at the manufacturing level.
So ensuring that doesn't happen is actually very straightforward. So every single batch of manufacturing we ever do gets heavy metal testing. And we actually follow WHO guidelines, which are more stringent than even India guidelines, to ensure that there is no heavy metal contamination whatsoever, right? So heavy metal is just one test. We do almost 11 different tests for every batch of manufacturing. So everything from microbiological content to heavy metal to even testing packing material to testing the amount of active that's actually left in the product, whether it's within limits or not at the end of the process, right? So there's a bunch of different testing that happens, right? The problem with heavy metal is a little bit more complicated one, which is that for us, while we've taken the very simple call that we are not going to utilize heavy metals such as mercury, etc. In Ayurveda, right, back in the day, there is actually an understanding that if you process heavy metals in a certain way, they stop being toxic, right? And if that's the case, then it is usable, right? So it's a very complicated thing. Hence, the call we've taken is not to use dangerous heavy metal at all as ingredients.
How do you, like, communicating this to a normal customer or user is the way you build trust, right?
Sure.
So, I bought a bunch of Shilajit from Kapiva. And one thing I was like, okay, having spoken to you before, I know that I can trust the Kapiva based on how you do things, which is why I bought it. And then I also saw this slip within the package, which shows the lab results. Correct. So is that how you think about building trust?
So yeah, actually, Shilajit and a few other products already have it. But within the next 4 months, we are planning to give access to the entire range of testings that we are doing on that product to the customer, right? So be it heavy metal, be it micro, be it efficacy testing, right? All of that we want the customer to have access to in every single batch, right? So I think that's a way of building transparency and then eventually building a lot of trust for the customer itself. I think, we are also now working on actually communicating the kind of things that we're doing, in a more effective way. So for example, we've recently closed MOUs with some of the top institutions in India, right? So, we'll just be finalizing this, but rather than just keeping it in the back end, right, we actually plan to talk about this more openly, right, to ensure that the work that we are doing and the back end sort of efforts that we are doing that are revolutionizing Ayurveda is understood more and more by the customer, right? One thing we're already doing is socializing this with the healthcare community, right? So reaching out to doctors, showing them the kind of work that we're doing, showing them the details of our research, tying up with, for example, for a double-blind clinical trial for our diabetes product, we took some of the top endocrinologists in India, as part of our ethics committee. Things like that actually allow us to already bring in the healthcare community. These things we want to actually be able to now communicate better to the customer as well. One thing we are very excited about is that we actually feel that customers are now smarter and smarter and smarter, and even these nuances around the type of clinical trial, etc., are something more and more customers are appreciating and understanding, which is something which we are very excited about.
So, is it difficult to maintain quality, safety at very large scale?
The fact that I'm doing 11 different tests costs money, right? So I think it's a trade-off, right? And the trade-off is that, okay, I'm ensuring that I'm delivering a product that is highly efficacious, completely safe, right? And that has a certain cost associated to it. So we've taken the call that safety and efficacy are the things that we care the most about. And in healthcare, we believe the customer cares the most about as well, right? If it costs more, I think that cost is worth it, right? We pay for so many different things. I think our health is something that we should be open to investing in, right? So it's a matter of cost, end of the day, because those tests are expensive, those machines are expensive. I'll give you an example, right? When we first started, the kind of testing we wanted to do, right? None of the manufacturers we wanted to work with had those machines, right? So we had to actually help through soft loans, through pushing, through extra to make sure that they buy some of these machines, and multiple tests, multiple machines, a huge capacity. And each machine can only do a certain number, right? So as your volumes grow, you need to actually buy more machines. So it's not a one-time cost, right? So it was a large push, right? A lot of the manufacturers we worked with also didn't understand that why nobody else asked for this, why are you asking for this, right? Some people were even finding it ridiculous that who does this kind of testing? It's ridiculous, right? But we pushed. We were very clear that this is what we wanted, this is how we want to build it. And today, a lot of manufacturing that we do is brownfield, because we realized that it's very difficult for a third party to invest into this if they don't have that vision, right? So a lot of the investment we open to do ourselves. But it was a process to actually even build that. And end of the day, it translates to cost.
So you talked about some of your customer not really caring, and some are increasingly becoming more savvy and wants to know more about the products. So who actually is the customer?
Everybody cares about one thing consistently, and that thing is results. Am I going to get results, right? The difference is only that there's a big chunk of customers in India that already have a very strong belief in Ayurveda, right? So for them, a clinical trial doesn't really change anything, right? They're saying, okay, if I trust the business and I believe in Ayurveda, then I already have faith in the fact that the product will deliver a result, right? The clinical trial doesn't really necessarily change my mind. However, there's a large chunk of customers today who, over a period of time, saying, no, I need more proof, right? I need validation before I can trust a product or a company, right? This is a very interesting question. And we want to redefine this answer completely as who is the customer, right? In our mind, let's take a diabetes product, right? What does the product deliver? It's an adjunct therapy, by the way. It's not a primary therapy. So you're meant to be taking it along with your allopathic medicine, right? But allopathic medicine, while it's very good at immediate symptomatic relief, right? And immediately moving certain sort of parameters, over a long term, there are certain negatives that come with it, right? Such as you keep on taking it, you keep on increasing your dosage. That leads to unwanted side effects. It leads to comorbidities. Potentially, it also leads to things like issues with your gut, issues with your energy, right? So it's a long-term problems kind of tend to multiply, right? So that's where Ayurveda can play a role, right? So what we've proven in our double-blind test, so we've done a trial with your medication and placebo versus your medication and Kapiva diaphragm, right? And people who take our product, right, they end up seeing much better quality of life sort of outcomes, right? So better energy levels, better gut health, and that eventually leads to lesser need for increasing dosage as well as lesser complications going forward, right? Now that is something that if you speak to any diabetes customer who's been facing these issues, it's something which is a life-changing outcome, right? Because it's not only about life anymore, right? It's about quality of life, it's as important, right? So in that scenario, I look at it, I would say every single customer of any allopathic medicine for diabetes in India is our customer, right? So that is a very different approach to where traditionally the customer for Ayurveda would be a much smaller subset, right? Very often when you would go to Ayurvedic doctors, some of them would say that we don't need allopathy, you need Ayurveda, right? What we found is that no, allopathy has done some amazing things in terms of helping treat diabetes, and the role of Ayurveda here is adjunct. So the minute we start thinking in this way, right, suddenly we put ourselves in the mainstream, right? And then the customer base potential also grows, right? Because we are saying that what is the role of Ayurveda in the larger healthcare ecosystem?
Yeah, you've now scaled Kapiva to like 500 crore business. What were the main challenges to get to this point? And also, the next target I hope is like a 10x from here, like 5,000. What do you think would be the challenges?
Sure. So, I think revenue is an outcome, right? Not an input, right? So I think if you look at the challenges now and later, they're all business challenges, right? So I think the challenges that we had in maybe the journey so far, number one was even figuring out the route and journey for R&D, right? How do we actually kind of, a lot of the things that I'm telling you now, and the process that we built now took a lot of time, effort to figure out, right? So I think, build that credibility, and even tying up with, some of the top sort of institutes was not easy to do in the beginning. I think beyond that, there were two further challenges. I think the first one, very clearly for us, was actually educating the customer, right? So healthcare is not something where, I can run a 20-second ad and someone going to be like, okay, let's buy a healthcare product, right? So the go-to-market approach here is a very differentiated one, where it's more education-based, right? So most of our communication is a doctor explaining the mechanism of a product or a consumer giving a testimonial, right? So it's very education-based as opposed to traditional marketing. So that was something we had to learn. The second big challenge we would have is that, while we've made Ayurveda much more predictable, it's still not overnight, right? It's still never going to be that you take something and tomorrow you see a major difference, right? So it still takes maybe at least 2-3 weeks to see the initial micro benefits, and then maybe a month or two to see the larger benefits, if not a little bit longer, right? So another challenge we faced was how do we actually ensure that adherence happens, that people consume the product for the time frame needed so that they actually see the right benefit over a period of time, right? And that's when the whole health tech and consultation approach came in, right? So these are some of the challenges that we saw for the journey till today. I think the next big challenges are a couple, right, that we see already. I think one big challenge is that how do we actually take the R&D, right, to the level of global pharma, right? The cost associated with that, right, and the expertise associated with that is a step ahead. We actually are building that playbook for the next 5 years currently. That, what is the next investments and next playbook and next steps from an R&D point of view we want to do, right? I think beyond that, one big thing that we are also looking at is global, right? I think while our focus today is purely in India, I think, in order to truly kind of build the company that we think we can, right? We want to kind of take this global as well. And I think we are very proud of the fact that we are in a position to take India's heritage to the world, right? So I think that is something we're still figuring out. About 5-10% of our revenue is global today. But it's still not an established business or business model, right? That's something we are still working on and expanding as we speak. So I think these are a couple of big challenges that we see going forward.
So in terms of international expansion, who are the customers in these international markets? Are these people of Indian origin?
No, so we've not seen any kind of, so maybe there might be a slightly higher percentage of Indians, let's say in the UK or the US, right? But it's not that the only people who are buying are Indians, right? We have a good 90-95% of the people who are buying are not Indian origin, let me put it that way, right? Customers are actually, if you look at it right now, the power of sort of this herbal medicine is not a India-only kind of story, right? So it is actually a global phenomena already. And the reality is that what we want is that there's an Indian company who is at the forefront of this, right? If you look at things like yoga, for example, they're huge in the US. But is it actually somebody from India who was able to take it there? Is it an Indian company? No, right? So it's our heritage. It's our knowledge, right? I think what's important is that we own this globally as opposed to,
people white labeling so material sourced from India.
Correct.
Is that the most surprising thing for you for the international market, that it's already kind of big, or is there anything interesting that you've learned?
No, I think while it's already very big, right, the focus globally right now has been more ingredient based, right? So it'll be a turmeric, ashwagandha, now Shilajit is becoming huge globally, right? But that step from ingredient and wellness to problem solution is something that is where the opportunity is, right? And that's where, things like clinicals will actually play an even larger role. Of course, clinicals are very relevant for single ingredient as well, right? Because we map the pathway. But going forward, I think the bigger opportunity is that can you actually solve a health concern with a combination or even a single ingredient, right? Rather than saying it for general wellness.
And get acceptance in the international markets, right?
Actually, acceptance is surprisingly high. So you asked something I'm surprised about. We were looking at some data. 90% plus of Americans are herbal acceptors. That means that they believe that herbal compounds or herbal medicines can positively impact their healthcare, right? So there's already a significantly high number of amount of belief there, right? I think have they been given the right products and the right sort of proof? I think that is something where more work has to be done.
Everyone talks about how Chinese traditional medicine grew. I think 2012 or something, they had a policy plan, 10 to 15x. What did China do and what can we do to replicate that?
It's funny what I was telling you earlier. The biggest thing that worked in their favor was actually healthy skepticism. The government came out and said that, okay, if you want to sell it as a medicine, show me proof. That put a lot of pressure on the community, and that pressure actually led to them really creating much more scientifically validated outcomes than that without that pressure, right? Once that proof started to come out, right, then the government realized that, okay, wow, this is something which is proprietary to us, we own, let's support this and make this larger, right? So it's a combination of that. While there is a lot of still support coming from the government today, right, and be it soft support, in particular, or hard support, where people talk about sort of Ayurveda in a very positive light. Like we have been a huge beneficiary of that. For example, the Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, actually talked about our company in one of his Mann Ki Baats, right? So things like that. There's been a lot of soft support, for us. But having said that, I think there is the ability to maybe help a little bit more on the clinical and R&D side. For example, one thing which could be a complete game changer, right, is that registering a medicine in the US is a huge cost, right? We're talking about at least $100 million, if not more, right? No company would take that risk on its own, right? But if any one Ayurvedic herb ever got listed, it would open the sort of entire credibility of Ayurveda significantly, right? So there are certain investments which it would be very difficult for companies to make, but potentially there could be a public-private partnership where it would open up the whole industry, and it would be a huge help both from the country point of view, because suddenly our our exports of Ayurveda, our sort of soft power, etc., would increase significantly, and there would be a win-win for both, right? There was a paper I was looking at recently. I'm not sure, but I believe that for every rupee the Chinese government or every dollar the Chinese government invested into TCM, they got like a 30x return or something like that on the economy.
So when it comes to a government push, the ministry that's responsible is the Ayush ministry, right? And was established in 2014, if I'm not wrong. Have they actually done something that has already helped?
Definitely. So I think even establishing an independent ministry itself showed like kind of intent the government had. And I think, in terms of particularly increasing output of Ayurvedic doctors, right? There was a huge shortage of Ayurvedic doctors out there, improving quality of Ayurvedic doctor education. There's a lot of things that have happened for the positive, right? I think it's a journey, right? I think there's a lot more that we jointly need to achieve, right? For us to really be able to bear the fruit of the potential of Ayurveda, right? But there's definitely been movement in the positive.
So something that could unlock like a 10x growth would be what you mentioned about validation.
Sort of global level or global standards of R&D for global markets will require significant investments, right? So some help there potentially, and not only, money is one part of it, right? But I think even, having a very clear understanding today, for example, we are exploring that if I want to register a medicine in country X, right? What is the process? Because, we are not a drug, right? So a lot of different things which process that a drug goes through is not relevant for us, right? So even establishing those protocols, right, becomes something very valuable. By the way, this work is going on. There are dialogues going on between different countries, and actually I have seen personally that Ayurvedic points are picked up at the highest level of government, right? From a government to government kind of conversation. But I think there is more scope there for us to improve.
So, looking into the future, you already mentioned about more investments in R&D, focus on international markets.
Sure.
Is there any plan to, typically there is a lot of wellness businesses that play on Ayurveda.
Sure.
You can find plenty of them in Kerala.
Sure.
Any plans to move into categories like that?
I think that's something that, of course, is an option, right? And ideally, you would like to take Ayurveda before you get sick, right? And stop yourself from getting sick in the first place. A lot of, our investment into healthcare happens after we actually see the symptoms of sickness, right? That's the reality of where we are today, right? So that is where we are focusing on as of now, right? As, time goes by and as, the idea of preventive healthcare becomes larger and larger in India, I definitely feel that, there's a large role we can play there as well.
But that preventive healthcare is a long-term macro trend for sure, right? You're wearing a Whoop, I'm wearing an Ultra Human.
Sure.
At least there is a group of people who seriously care about this.
Yes, but a very small group.
Very
right?
small group.
So if I look at genuinely sort of people doing health first products, right, in India, that percentage would be less than 0.1%, right? While smartwatches, etc., are much larger, the core use of that is not healthcare. The core use of that is more, technology related aspirations, right? So while, this is something which is growing, right? And by the way, even today, if you look at the general sort of, let's go to Amazon, right? If I look at some of the most ingredient based, be it amla, be it aloe vera, be it a wheatgrass, we would be the number one seller as of today as well, right? But the reality is that while you would think, okay, let's take a perfect example of Karela Jamun. Right? Karela Jamun is a more wellness product, right? Where, if you have slightly high sugar also, even if it's not diabetes, it makes sense to take, right? And then we have our Diafree, which is a product for diabetes, right? We sell almost 10x of a diabetes product than of a Karela Jamun product, right? So the reality is that the demand and the need today from a customer is much more for a problem solution than for a wellness product. So while we're already present there, right, and while a lot of our products are bestsellers, right, the customer demand is lower.
Yeah. Okay, one last question.
Sure.
It's 2035. What does Kapiva look like?
So, the ambition, if I put it in a line, would be to become a herbal Pfizer, right? So a well-respected global healthcare company built not on belief but built on proof, right? Where we are changing the lives of hopefully, hundreds of millions of people in a measurable and life-changing way, right? So I think that's the ambition that, can we really bring Ayurveda to, a level of proof and respect which is similar to allopathy. So actually defining the role for Ayurveda in the global healthcare ecosystem and really cementing that. I think that is the vision and the journey we want to see.
Yeah, this was amazing. I've been looking forward to doing this for a while.
Pleasure. Thank you for coming down.
Yeah, thank you.